Meanwhile, the scene shifts to the Holy Kingdom, Rosario. We see a woman standing in front of the statue of Rosario. She smiles, and it is revealed that it's none other than Utea, who is wearing a saint uniform and is looking stunning. After shifting into the Mage Tower area, an elderly man appeared quietly. "Oh, my disciple, I am back." He looked around, trying to sense a familiar presence. His brows slowly furrowed. "I can no longer feel the time gate. What is going on here?" This man was the Tower Master of the Blue Magic Tower, an 8th Circle Mage, Salim Microdot. A faint sense of unease rose within him. Did something go wrong while I was away? Inside the tower, the wise Tower Master was in terrible condition. Extreme exhaustion weighed down her body, and her face looked pale and lifeless, almost like a corpse. She stood silently, staring at the deck beneath her feet. When she noticed his presence, her eyes widened slightly. "Master, you're really back," she said weakly. "I've completed the task you entrusted to me." Salim was startled. "What?" He stepped forward. "What happened to you?" Before he could react further, her legs gave out, and she collapsed into his arms. His expression stiffened. "Did something serious happen? She isn't arguing with me like she usually does." He carefully supported her, his gaze turning cautious. Lena became the wise Tower Master at a very young age due to her exceptional talent. Her arrogance and sharp tongue were notorious. Some even said she had reduced rookie mages to tears more than once. She was undeniably gifted, but difficult to deal with. I never tried to correct her personality, Salim thought. A genius mage realizes the limits of their achievements upon reaching the 7th circle. Humility comes naturally after that. But this situation is strange. He snapped his head up and spoke again. "Why didn't you tell me earlier? My trip to the north lasted far longer than expected. Were you overwhelmed managing everything alone?" At his words, Lena suddenly lifted her head. Tears welled in her eyes as she looked at him. Then she let out a long, shaky sigh. She explained everything. The situation surrounding the magic gate and the man named Alan. "The gate couldn't be closed," she said quietly. "That man was involved." Salim's gaze sharpened. "You can't explain the exact reason, can you? You made an oath?" His voice hardened. "Why would you swear an oath to a mere count?" "There was no need." Lena trembled slightly. "There isn't much I can say in detail," she replied softly. "That's all I'm allowed to explain." Salim exhaled slowly, then lightly patted her shoulder. "So that's what finally made you modest," he said calmly. "An incomprehensible mage. Or perhaps," his eyes widened faintly, "an origin mage." Lena nodded weakly. "The man named Alan possesses the power of an origin mage." Salim raised his hand and lightly tapped his disciple on the head. She was so shocked that she did not even try to brush his hand away. Salim then lifted his gaze toward the distance and spoke calmly. "The Count Palatine of the Astrea Kingdom." Quite interesting. 1 month later, after returning from the Blue Magic Tower, Alan continued immersing himself in magical experiments. While organizing his research, Silas spoke in a thoughtful tone. "After obtaining the mark of corruption, I began researching phrases seriously. Since I can now use more mana per day, my progress has increased." Alan carefully wrote down his theories. "The key lies in the rules governing phrases," he said quietly. "If the conditions are not met, the magic collapses. Phrases that do not match the spell should never be used." He added another note. "Identical effects cannot be repeated. Only 4 components can be used at once. Similar phrases overlap, creating interference." After a brief pause, he continued writing. "Some phrases require proper arrangement, almost like guidance. I believe I've discovered a new rule related to phrase usage." He glanced at the page and spoke casually. "It might be connected to how magic aligns with the laws of nature, or perhaps where I place those laws. I'm not entirely sure yet." At that moment, Yuen arrived. "My lord, what's going on here?" Yuen asked, scanning the surroundings. "Your magic grows stronger every time I witness it, Count." Alan exhaled lightly. "I suppose so." Yuen frowned in disbelief. "This doesn't feel like second circle magic anymore. It's on a completely different level compared to a few months ago." Alan gestured toward the massive crater carved into the ground. "An ordinary gravity spell wouldn't create something like this." Yen stared at the deep pit. "Did you really do this with gravity magic?" Alan nodded. "Even at maximum output, a second circle mage shouldn't be able to crush something to this extent." Wen looked at him with wide eyes. "Master, that's insane." Alan smiled faintly. "I thought I was getting stronger, but perhaps it isn't just an illusion." Wen let out a slow sigh. "Your magic truly is fascinating, Count. Why don't you believe in yourself more?" Alan shook his head. If the power increase were obvious, it wouldn't be due to proficiency or phrases alone, he explained calmly. On the first day, I worked with mud to shape basic constructs. On the second day, I refined my crafting techniques. On the third day, this result appeared. He looked at the crater again. Improved magical proficiency means greater precision and deeper understanding. I followed those 3 days as stages for developing gravity magic. Alan hesitated slightly before adding, phrases function more like trigger words. They activate attributes rather than define the spell itself. Lowering his voice, he continued, I spent months studying phrase arrays related to gravity. Recently, I've been using nearly identical phrases with slight alterations. Yuan listened in silence, his expression filled with awe. Standing before the board like a true researcher, Alan continued his explanation. He pointed at the diagrams he had drawn. Phrase array research chart, he said calmly. I discovered that the power only increases gradually as I fine-tune the optimal arrangement. He then looked up at Yuan, his brows slightly furrowed. It has to be an illusion. Otherwise, it wouldn't make sense. There's no reason for a spell's firepower to increase so suddenly. Alan paused for a moment before adding, maybe I'm simply in better condition these days. Yuan blinked in surprise. Is that so? He then reached into his coat. I came to deliver this. A letter just arrived. Alan's eyes lit up. Thanks, Yuan. I'll go back to my room and read it properly. You're heading back already? Yuan asked. Alan nodded. Yeah. I've already used all 3 spell casts I'm allowed for today. Back in his room, Alan opened his notebook and carefully unfolded the letter. His gaze sharpened as he read. A reason for my magic suddenly becoming stronger, he muttered. Could this be a reward tied to a curse? A faint heaviness settled over his expression. A curse, an Eastern ritual where the caster sacrifices themselves to inflict misfortune upon another, or even upon themselves. Once afflicted, the target suffers a loss but gains a compensatory benefit in return. Alan shook his head. There's no one from the East around me, he said quietly. So it can't be that. Returning to the present moment, he closed the notebook and stood up. Then maybe, he murmured while walking inside. It's the result of receiving faith. Alan suddenly stopped mid-thought. Account of a small kingdom, one the underworld barely acknowledges, he muttered. He let out a quiet sigh. That doesn't make sense at all. After a moment, he shook his head. Well, sometimes you just have to let things go and keep living, Alan said to himself. Nothing bad will come of it, right? Holy Kingdom of Rosrio, capital city, Royanal. Royanal was a massive, radiant city bathed in the divine light. Pure white structures stretched endlessly, forming a sacred landscape where the people worshipped the goddess of the moon and peace, Shrionia. Inside the Eastern prayer hall, Yutia stood firmly before the statue of the goddess, her posture dignified and calm. Footsteps echoed behind her. Greetings, sister. Yuta turned her head. The knight who had arrived could not help but pause. Her appearance was breathtaking, serene, refined, and quietly overwhelming. And to you, Sir Loki, Yuta replied gently. Have you been well? Loki narrowed his eyes slightly. She's merely a nun, he thought, lower in rank than a paladin, not even bearing the mark of holy grace. And yet, I must show her respect. He stepped forward and bowed deeply. Yes, he said solemnly. We managed to save 8 children and 25 villagers from a small settlement between the eastern and western regions. It was all thanks to you, sister. Yuta smiled softly. Not at all, she replied. You were the one who carried out those deeds, and you were the one who guided someone as ignorant as me. Loki clenched his fist. I will always be grateful, he said quietly. For 20 years I lived in despair. I couldn't feel divine power, not even a trace. I was on the verge of giving up. His vision blurred as memory surfaced. He remembered himself sitting alone on the cold floor, broken and hollow. Then Yuta appeared. If there's something you desire that deeply, she had said softly, why not try placing your faith in the moon? Her smile back then had been faint yet unsettling. A plan had already been forming in her mind. The moon, Loki had whispered. Yuta's crimson eyes gleamed as she looked at him, her voice cold and calm. You'll understand, she said. Once you truly walk that path. Loki's gaze hardened as his thoughts drifted inward. I was so desperate that I was willing to do anything. As she instructed, he prayed to the moon for several days. Then the change came suddenly. His energy surged at an astonishing pace. Divine power flowed into his sword, and almost instinctively, he learned how to wield it. The sensation was overwhelming, pure, powerful, undeniable. He had been ecstatic, but that joy was short-lived. A moment of temptation followed and despair crept into his heart. I placed my faith in the moon, not in goddess Coronia, he muttered sharply. Fear tightened his chest. Have I stepped onto the path of heresy? Yet power borrowed from the gods was still divine power. Even the sacred artifacts engraved with the name of goddess Coronia responded to him. The charm in his possession and the bracelet around his wrist glowed faintly, filled with holy energy. Loki let out a bitter smile. That alone proved the legitimacy of the divine power he possessed. Returning to the present, he lifted his head and looked at Yuta. Why did you tell me to believe in the moon? He asked. Yuta smiled gently, her voice calm and reassuring. Because faith is born from belief in what cannot be seen, she said, and such belief takes time to manifest. Her smile deepened. It is always easier to obtain what you seek from something that already exists. Then her tone sharpened. The moon will always be with you. Everything you know, everything you perceive, originates from it. She spoke with certainty, hiding the true intentions, forming quietly behind her eyes. The moon carried a meaning far deeper than Loki realized, one that felt unsettling in this moment. Yuta raised her hand, gesturing toward the sky above. Loki's eyes widened. I see, he said softly. The goddess herself is the moon. This allows even doubtful humans to believe with certainty. He lowered his head and bowed deeply. Sister Yotia, he said with sincerity. Thank you, from the bottom of my heart. Yuta tilted her head slightly. If you wish to express your gratitude, a sharp, almost wicked smile curved her lips. Shall we pray together? Loki answered without hesitation. I would gladly do so, as many times as needed. She nodded calmly. You arrived just in time. Many have already gathered for prayer. Inside the prayer hall, the atmosphere was solemn and heavy with reverence. Yuta walked forward, her footsteps echoing softly as she ascended the elevated platform. The gathered believers lowered their heads at her presence. Standing at the highest point, she raised her hands. Now then, she declared, let us pray to the great moon. At that moment, she stood as Yotia Bludia, sister of the Holy Kingdom of Rosario. Meanwhile, Alan sat in his office, reading the letter that detailed the latest updates. There was nothing special about it. After finishing, he let out a deep sigh and lowered his head onto the desk. Fate meant that everyone was doing well. Of course, that was good news. Still, a quiet loneliness crept in. Other than Yusha, he had not received a single letter from anyone. A sense of despair surfaced as he reflected on it. From their perspective, it was understandable. They had never even seen his face. To them, he was merely a benefactor. No, perhaps just someone who had helped them once and then faded into the background. Alan lifted his head, his eyes narrowing slightly. In the end, he had already achieved his goal. He had guided them onto the right path and ensured they would not become those who destroyed the world. There was no reason to feel hurt, yet deep inside his mind a silent truth remained. Nothing. No one. Alan let out a quiet sigh. Yusha must have been busy, yet she still made sure to send him a letter every month. Perhaps he was overthinking it. Even so, a tight ache formed in his chest. No other child had written to him. That realization hurt more than he expected. More than anything, he wanted to know how Yusha was doing now, what she was occupied with, and whether she was safe. Tears welled up before he could stop them. After raising 5 children, was it possible that the eldest was the only one who truly appreciated his efforts? Alan clenched his hand and forced himself to calm down. I'm fine, he murmured to himself. Just then, Count, are you busy? Alan stiffened in shock and looked up. You scared me. He coughed lightly, regaining his composure, then glanced toward the door. You're still here? Yuen stood straight and replied calmly. Of course, he continued. I received some information about the children from the Information Guild. I thought it would be best to report it to you immediately. Alan's eyes sharpened. Oh, what is it about? Yuen answered without hesitation. It's about Raiden, the one you asked me to keep an eye on last time. Alan was momentarily confused, but he did not voice it. He had asked Yuen to gather information, so this was not unexpected. Still, the report caught him off guard. What is it? Alan asked, leaning forward. Tell me everything. From start to finish. Yuen nodded and began his explanation. First of all, Xiaoran and Deus are the ones causing the most commotion. He continued calmly, laying out the details. Xiaoran had already secured 32 consecutive victories out of the 100 required to challenge Baba Yanga. Alan froze. 32 wins in a row? He frowned. Wait, the fighter with the highest streak isn't. The Lion King, Yuen interrupted. 41 consecutive victories. Alan fell silent for a moment. Then realization struck him. The Lion King was that broken character who temporarily joined the player's party in the game. So that place really is filled with monsters, Alan muttered under his breath. They rely on fighters for military strength. A nervous sigh escaped him. Shaoran was already nearing the peak of that hierarchy. The growth was unnatural, far too fast. What exactly is going on there? Alan murmured. Something must be driving this. Yuen let out a restrained sigh before continuing. As for Deus and the Night Order, reports confirm they eliminated one of the 8 barbarian chiefs. Alan's eyes sharpened. Karuta of the Snowfield, Yuen said. The battle was decisive. Deus personally took the barbarian's life and secured the victory. The image formed in Alan's mind was unsettling. Deus's growth was no longer subtle. It was terrifying. So you're saying they've become monsters, Alan said quietly. Superhumans forged through rituals. He let out a slow breath. I know them far too well. In the game, he had fought the barbarians countless times and even faced their god. Just recalling it made his temples ache. At least that nightmare only began after the 5 great sins descended. Dealing with that had been nothing but trouble. I suppose I don't need to worry about Deus anymore, Alan said at last. Yuen responded immediately. Because of this achievement, he's now being treated on the same level as the first sword, Reinhardt. Alan sighed. Should I have gone to see them in person? He murmured. If I had, things might have felt different. I was genuinely considering a visit. Yuen continued. As for Reinhardt, who has since become an appraiser, he's said to be able to apply black imprints that enhance the power of artifacts. He explained the process briefly, his tone carrying a hint of excitement. Isn't that interesting? Alan gave a faint smile. If things keep going well, I'd like to see it myself. Then his expression hardened. What about Raiden? He asked. Did he truly become a pirate? Yuen's gaze sharpened. That's the main issue, Alan frowned. You're serious? You've heard of the 7 April leaks in the Sea of Rak? Yuen said. The regions where the great pirates gather. He paused before delivering the report. Raiden has become the captain of the largest among them. The 1st April leak? What? Alan shouted. The strength left his body and he nearly collapsed back into his chair. Disbelief flooded his mind. Impossible. He had sponsored that child for an entire year. All he wanted was for him to grow up happily and live a normal life. And now, piracy. Was this some kind of joke? Even the so-called prince-maker scenarios were not this absurd. A ridiculous meme he once laughed at online had turned into his reality. Alan covered his face, his shoulders trembling. Then he snapped his head up. A pirate, he said hoarsely. That's not why I sent him to Rax in the first place, Yuen explained calmly. Raiden possessed exceptional sensory abilities, making him adept at detecting enemies. As a member of the sea god race, a rarity on the continent, the sea was his natural domain. There are countless rare artifacts hidden in the Sea of Rax, Yuen continued. You recommended the path of a treasure hunter. It was a promising career. You even gave him a specialized item to enhance his sensing ability. Alan clenched his jaw. And yet, he muttered, he still chose piracy. His voice dropped, heavy with frustration. What a mess. Yuen hesitated, then added, Still, my lord, if he truly became a great pirate and rose to the position of captain, then he's essentially the ruler of that sea. By all accounts, he's a major figure now. Alan did not look pleased, I suppose, he replied flatly. Inside his mind, doubt spiraled. How did Raiden even manage to take down the former captain of the first Apsar Leaguer? Those captains were all superhuman beings, monsters of the sea. The pirates of the 7th Apsar Leaguer were said to be invincible in naval combat. A sudden thought struck him. Did he obtain one of the most broken artifacts from the old era? Alan had spent an absurd amount of time grinding the treasure hunter minigame just to acquire top-tier equipment. Was Raiden's rise truly the result of overwhelming item power? He released a long sigh. I know the world never follows plans perfectly, Alan murmured. But this feels strangely bitter. For a moment, it felt as if his soul had left his body. Alan slumped back into his chair, staring blankly ahead. So this is how a father feels, he said quietly. After trying so hard for his child count, Yuen said at once, concern in his voice. Are you all right? What's wrong? Before Alan could respond, at the heart of the chiefdom of Korkia lay the great maritime city Rex. A breathtaking island stood proudly against the endless sea, its beauty unmatched. Beyond its shores rested the domain feared and revered by sailors alike, the 7 pirate paradises. Among them, The largest and most glorious was the first Apsar Leaguer. This was a land once ruled by a captain who had offered sacrifice and received the blessing of kingship. That era ended with the fall of the great pirate known as Red Slayer, El Sidra, who had dominated these waters for years. Now the banner of the first Apsar Leaguer flew under a new name, Raiden. He stood upright at the edge of the deck, gazing toward the horizon, his expression calm yet distant. "I still can't wrap my head around the great moon," Raiden muttered. "What exactly is it?" At first he had not cared. He never gave it much thought. To him, Alan had merely been a benefactor, a noble who gave him a chance at life. Without that intervention, he would have died as a slave, reduced to material for biological experiment. Raiden clenched his hand slightly. "Honestly, my time in the Blue Moon felt less like devotion," he admitted quietly, "and more like I was simply following Yusha." The sea breeze brushed past him as his thoughts drifted deeper, tangled between gratitude, confusion, and a future he had never planned to claim. Raiden frowned as a thought surfaced. So when will a direct order finally come from the Great Moon? If it was truly a command, then why did it feel so distant, so unclear? He recalled the letter he had read earlier. At that moment, a sense of doubt had crept in. Was there ever any meaning in becoming a treasure hunter? Instead of motivation, he felt a vague repulsion toward the idea. There were too many people he needed to take revenge on, immediately. His gaze darkened as memories resurfaced. On a nameless island, his tribe had lived quietly, peacefully. Then those black-clad figures arrived. Without reason or mercy, they slaughtered everyone. The screams, the blood, the suffering, it never left his mind. Later on the continent, he barely managed to escape too. The nightmare continued. Hunters tracked them down. In front of his eyes, his exhausted parents were killed without hesitation. Those bastards! After that, he was sold off as a slave. Raiden clenched his fist. Becoming a treasure hunter, receiving that so-called gift, none of it had anything to do with the revenge he had sworn. None of it brought his parents back. He lifted his head and looked toward his island. "For now, I'll pretend to follow orders." A sudden noise pulled him from his thoughts. What's all that commotion? He turned slightly. Pirates nearby were laughing loudly, enjoying their food and drink. One of them raised his head, lit his cigar, and spoke with excitement. "Only the chosen ones can receive the heavenly king's blessing through sacrifice. Every captain of the 7 Apsar Leaguer who survives becomes eternal." Raiden froze. His eyes sharpened as he slowly turned toward the speaker, killing intent flooding his gaze. "The ones who killed my parents. The 7 pirates." His expression grew terrifyingly dark. "So they actually managed to get their hands on a king?" he thought grimly. "And now they're nonsense. The so-called heavenly king's power was not some miracle. It was a blasphemy. That power could only be granted by the sea god Clyde. It required a scarred ritual, one that used the body of a member of the sea god race. That power was never meant for outsiders. It belonged to his tribe, to his family, and every single captain of the 7 Apsar Leaguer was using it." Raiden's breathing grew heavy as rage surged through him. Those hunters, he thought, teeth clenched. They split my parents apart for this. His hand tightened, veins bulging. "I'll destroy them," Raiden vowed silently. Every last pirate. A chilling darkness surged through his body. Under the midnight moon, Raiden stood atop a high hill, overlooking the distant celebration of his enemies. His gaze was dark and heavy. "How did they know?" Raiden muttered under his breath. "I never told anyone my story." A cold realization settled in his heart. It felt as if the great moon itself had prepared this opportunity, an opening for revenge, arranged to fulfill a long-standing promise. His eyes remained locked on the ship below. There among his enemies, Raiden clenched his fists tightly, rage boiling beneath the surface. "I can't take revenge yet," he said in a low voice. "There are superhumans who wield the power of the sea god." His eyes narrowed. As his thoughts aligned, his gaze shifted to the pendant hanging against his chest. In the next moment, its glow flared sharply. "If all of this was truly intentional," Raiden murmured, "then there must be a reason the great moon gave me this gift as well." He lowered his head slightly, staring at the pendant with unmistakable reverence. Admiration filled his expression as he offered silent worship. "This will be the foundation of my revenge," he said firmly. The scene shifted to morning. Without hesitation, Raiden leapt from the peak of the cliff, plunging deep into the sea below. A sharp light flashed across his eyes as the pendant activated. The great moon's gift, the Amrita goggles. Raiden said calmly. They make it easy to locate artifacts hidden deep within the ocean. His gaze pierced through the dark waters. The artifacts I found were more than enough to compensate for my lack of strength. The moment Raiden discovered the treasury box, its surface gleaming faintly, he opened it. Inside was a golden bracelet. He took it out and fastened it around his ankle. To think I only offered a simple thank you, Raiden said quietly. How foolish of me. The seaside was breathtaking. Raiden lifted his gaze toward the moon, its light reflecting across the water. The great moon kept its promise, he said. Not only did you bring the target of my revenge directly before me, but you even granted me the power to carry it out, the power that truly belongs to my tribe. A trace of understanding appeared in his eyes. I finally understand the command you sent in that letter. A faint smile formed on his lips. Your true intention was never just revenge, Raiden continued. It was to help me seize control of the 7 predators. He lifted his head slightly. Under the moonlight, his posture was composed and confident, his presence striking. I was right, he said calmly. I won't forget anything. His thoughts drifted to Yusha. That woman is truly a genius, Raiden muttered. And terrifying as well. He exhaled softly. That day marked the beginning, he said. What once felt like an unbearable sentence has slowly become a source of trust. He sighed, his voice low. Everything has been engraved deep into my heart. Raiden's eyes sharpened as he silently spoke a vow to the great moon. He turned back, gazing at the vast sea beneath the moonlight, immersed in the breathtaking scenery. Raiden looked up. 3 months later, the oppressive heat had faded, and autumn had arrived. It was the most beautiful season in Benel, Estria, the time of the grand social gathering. Inside a moving carriage, Alan sat stiffly, his expression tense. I was forced to tag along, he said with clear displeasure. Once every 4 years, mandatory attendance. I truly hate this ridiculous event. His mood darkened at the thought of the banquet ahead. The carriage moved swiftly along the road. Lord, Yuen reported, the carriages from the Cartelad and Adran families have joined us as planned. All right, Alan replied. Inside, he understood the reason. Traveling in a large group reduced the risk of bandit attacks. Even so, the frustration remained. What a strange and annoying culture. Alan let out a quiet sigh. Only then did he realize how tense he had been that evening. When he reached the gathering hall, 2 men were already speaking nearby. Count, honestly, even a single guard is more than enough, one of them said. The other replied with a mocking tone. Ever since you accidentally inherited the title, your treasury must be in trouble. The atmosphere made Alan feel suffocated and irritated. For me, the problem isn't bandits, Alan thought coldly. It's that bastard, Brad Nobles. The 2 men kept hovering close, their behavior oily and unpleasant, smiling excessively as if trying to curry favor. One of them even licked his lips in an exaggerated manner. Alan felt increasingly uncomfortable. He lowered his head toward his plate, hiding his expression, and muttered irritably, These guys spread poison with their words, then immediately run off to gossip behind my back. It wasn't surprising. The Palatineo family had long been notorious, a scoundrel faction that once dominated the western and eastern underworlds. Their power had been built on enormous wealth, all scraped from the darkest depths. But I'm satisfied with my current life, Alan thought calmly. I've already washed my hands of the underworld. It wasn't as if he had any trouble living peacefully now. Besides, he continued inwardly, that world is far too dangerous. Yet some wolves never stop barking. Because of that, the eastern underworld had recently become a target for bottom feeders. Nobles and the so-called predators were always standing at the forefront, stirring chaos. And then there's that rumor, Alan thought with mild irritation, that I only became a count because of luck. As expected, it fueled jealousy among the nobles. He knew very well that the rumor about him being the mastermind behind the kingdom had long since faded, downgraded into nothing more than the tale of a lucky beneficiary. At that moment, one of the nobles exclaimed dramatically, Oh dear, Count, how unfortunate that you're so short on funds. Another chimed in with a fake smile. You know, I could help you anytime if you just ask. Alan's patience thinned. Aren't you both a little too old to be acting this pitiful? He said bluntly. I didn't expect you to mock me right to my face. His gaze sharpened. These jerks are really crossing the line, he thought. I see, Alan continued inwardly. It's time for the Palatineo Victim Association. The Cartelade and Adran families, once bullied endlessly by Palatineo, were now venting all the resentment they had bottled up for years. Alan looked at the 2 men coldly. Now they're using me as an outlet, he thought, suppressing his irritation. Trying to regain control in their own twisted way, the image of their smug expressions made his stomach churn. "What a bunch of filthy dogs," Alan muttered inwardly. "It's not like I was the one who bullied them in the first place." Alan spoke with a faint mocking smile. "I feel like I'm dealing with some internet dog shit trolls." Yuen glanced at the two nobles in surprise, then nodded slightly. "Those jerks, you're right, my lord. I have to give you credit." Alan ignored the troublemakers entirely. "I won't respond," he said calmly. "Ignoring them completely is the best revenge." He then lifted his head and looked at Yuen. "Where have you been?" "They were handing this out in the kitchen." Yuen replied, holding up a plate. "You should try it. The roasted prawns are excellent." Alan glanced over and raised his brows slightly. "They look good," he said. "Very tempting." The two of them began eating together. "Root vegetables are always the best," Alan remarked, "especially on a chilly evening like this." Before Yuen could reply, the nobles spoke again. "I suppose all those underworld troops vanished because you couldn't manage them," one sneered. Another added mockingly, "It seems you can't even take proper care of your own carriage." Alan didn't even look at them. He continued eating his prawns without pause. "Listening to them," he said casually, "it's starting to sound like mosquitoes buzzing." The two nobles raised their voices. Clearly irritated, Alan simply took another bite. "Still tasty," he commented. Yuen nodded thoughtfully. "It would be even better with butter, my lord. You should try it next time." Their quiet conversation continued as the background noise faded. The scene shifted smoothly. Far to the north lay an endless land of freezing cold, a desolate expanse swallowed by snow and wind. The air itself felt lifeless, though all warmth had been stripped away. Barbarians lay scattered across the pale ground, collapsed and motionless, their bodies resembling frozen corpses. One man still struggled weakly. His gaze was dark, filled with pain and rage as he whispered through clenched teeth, "Those damn Caliban brats. They know nothing of honor." He was one of the 8 great Kulkan, a barbarian chief who worshipped battle itself. He recalled Samu's earlier words. They had expected a fair clash, a glorious confrontation. Instead, what lay before him was nothing but slaughtered bodies. For a Kulkan, combat was sacred, honorable, and magnificent. But this defeat, it was the result of a cowardly surprise attack. "This war is unjustified," he whispered, honored. Blood spilled from his mouth as he remembered the betrayal. The moment someone struck from behind, luring him into a trap under the guise of a duel proposed by a Caliban knight. Kulkan coughed violent, his body finally giving way as he collapsed onto the frozen ground. "What happened to Garuna of the snowfield?" he murmured painfully. His eyes shifted to the side, where a lifeless body lay motionless. A deep bitterness surfaced. "Garuna, I have met an end so shameful," the chief whispered, "one that won't even allow me to close my eyes in peace." Suddenly, the surrounding area darkened unnaturally, as if the light itself had been swallowed. A demonic voice echoed sharply through the frozen land. "Call my name!" Kulkan nearby cried out, blood and tears spilling together. Yet the dark voice did not stop. "Call for me," it whispered again. "Call upon my great name, the name you all worship." At that moment, the barbarian chief's breath finally faded. With his last strength, he exhaled a single name. The god of this world, Altaz. In the next instant, his body twitched. The barbarian chief slammed his palm into the frozen ground, forcing himself upright through sheer will. "Great God, Altaz," he gasped. He raised his head with trembling resolve. "We dare to call upon your honorable name, my lord." The air distorted. A figure slowly emerged from the darkness, mysterious and terrifying. White hair flowed down his back, and his body shimmered with a blue universe-like hue, resembling an otherworldly elf. His face carried a demonic sharpness, and his eyes glowed with insatiable hunger. The figure snapped his fingers sharply. "Yes," he said coldly. "Do that." His gaze pierced straight through the barbarian chief. "And I shall grant your heart's desire." Meanwhile, the scene unfolded from Alan's perspective as he moved through the banquet hall. His posture remained calm and dignified, carrying himself with the restraint expected of a noble. Even as he headed toward the social gathering, the uneasy coexistence around him continued. Other noble houses joined in the ridicule, their attitude unchanged. 2 parasitic nobles lingered nearby, openly mocking him. One sneered that Alan looked like someone greedily devouring prawns, then casually placed a beer bottle on top of his head, clicking his tongue in false pity. Alan did not react. He ignored them completely, maintaining the composure of a true noble. In his mind, however, Alan calmly assessed the situation. To him, they were nothing more than fish already caught in a net, unaware that the fishermen had long since tightened the line. Night gradually descended, and the nobles settled in to rest. Yuen enjoyed his meal without concern, while Alan continued to disregard the two men. The pair, on the other hand, twisted their expressions in frustration. "Damn it, that brat from the Palatunio line is completely ignoring us. This is absurd," one of them thought bitterly. The other leaned closer and whispered, "So what about the additional squad?" "I already checked using an artifact," the man replied quietly. "It's only that brat and his lunatic knight. That's all." His voice grew colder. "How dare they associate with nobility? It's insulting. And those rumors about them being dead, if they're true, we can proceed immediately. We'll enter the underworld without delay." The two nobles exchanged glances, their expressions turning increasingly repulsive as they plotted. They spoke of being free from following the Palatunio family's shadow, and fantasized about tasting the immense wealth and power circulating within the underworld. One of them let out a low, unsettling chuckle. "Once we control the back routes, shouldn't we give that brat a little gift as well?" "Yes," the other replied with a twisted smile. "He'll be grateful after we teach him how terrifying this world truly is." Neither of them realized that the great moon, whom they dismissed so casually, was far more terrifying than anything they could imagine. As their whispers continued, the ground suddenly trembled. A deep rumble echoed from behind the camp. In the darkness, monsters surged forward in massive numbers, revealing the arrival of an enormous monster army and throwing the entire night into chaos. At that moment, Knights was rooted in place, his gaze locked onto the goblin monsters behind them, their eyes glowing deep crimson as they surged forward in coordinated groups. A panicked noble fled past, and Knight seized the opening, stepping into position to intercept the attack. A mage raised his staff toward the sky, mana erupting as he charged straight at the monsters without hesitation. The goblins before them were abnormally large, their bodies far more powerful than expected. One knight muttered in disbelief that those creatures were truly goblins, while another scoffed arrogantly, dismissing them as weak monsters commonly found in forests. Their confidence wavered as the sheer number of goblins pressed in from all sides. The mage stared upward, unease creeping into his expression, and shouted for Alan to prepare for battle. One goblin stood out among the rest, towering over the others. Alan's eyes narrowed as he saw an injured knight collapse onto the ground. The massive goblin advanced relentlessly toward him. "That thing is charging straight for the knight," Alan said sharply. "Everyone on Outer Watch, be ready." A nearby knight shouted in confusion, demanding to know what was happening. Alan answered without hesitation, his voice tense but controlled. "I've never seen goblins like these. Their appearance is different. Their bodies are different. This isn't normal. It's a mutation, and they're infused with mana. If that's true, their physical strength is on a completely different level." The knights launched a counterattack, but the goblins pushed forward with terrifying force. The leading goblin slammed into the ground, releasing a brutal shockwave that cracked the earth beneath them. Debris scattered as the monster prepared to charge again. Suddenly, the ground trembled violently. The surrounding area shook as Alan completed his enchantment. Massive slabs of rock surged upward from the earth, as though summoned by an unseen force. One knight whispered in disbelief, comparing it to an earthquake. The enormous goblin was caught off guard as the rock formation crashed down, forcing the goblin horde to retreat instinctively. A dull, oppressive glow spread through the battlefield, and silence followed. A knight broke it with a stunned voice. Third-tier magic, rock wall, and a second-tier shield. Another mage stared around in shock. "There's another mage here? Who is it?" Alan did not answer. He calmly began a second enchantment, his mana compressing inward as he spoke a single word. Compression, mana converged, layer by layer. A powerful shockwave rippled outward, and a massive construct resembling a golden cannon took form. All the monsters were forcibly drawn toward the rock formation at its center. This point became the core of Alan's enchantment, the focal center of his overwhelming power. At that moment, every goblin trapped high within the magical barrier froze in place. Alan's gaze swept across them coldly. The surrounding men were completely stunned by the sight. Alan spoke again, his tone calm and refined. "Vacuumlation." A violent rumble followed. The energy within the barrier fluctuated wildly, distorting the air itself. Alan continued without hesitation. Return to the primordial. The gentleness in his voice only made it more terrifying. Mana burst outward as the crystal embedded in his bracelet shone brightly. The goblin monsters sealed within the barrier were engulfed by overwhelming pressure. One by one, despair overtook them as Alan's magic erased their existence entirely. The two despicable nobles stared in disbelief, their faces drained of color as they watched the scene unfold through the night. Alan stepped forward and spoke sharply, his presence commanding. "Don't just stand there. Stop spacing out. Prepare yourselves." His eyes shifted toward the remaining goblins, charging in from the darkness. The clash resumed immediately as monsters and knights collided. Alan also moved, mana surging through his body as he joined the battle. One monster fell after another, and the knights followed through, cutting down everything that remained. By the next day, the goblin army had been completely annihilated. The area was left in ruins, stained with the aftermath of the massacre. One of the nobles exclaimed excitedly that it was finally over. Several knights, exhausted yet smiling, spoke quietly among themselves, saying that the one feared by the world truly lived up to his reputation. Otherwise, none of them would have survived. Alan suddenly grimaced, his expression twisting. "I almost got sent straight to the grave," he muttered. Only then did he realize the strain on his body. The number of spells he had cast far exceeded his usual limit. From the middle of the battle onward, he had been little more than an ordinary person, his already limited mana completely drained. Just then, Yuan hurried over. "Count, are you injured anywhere?" "I'm fine," Alan replied, though his body trembled slightly. "Even with you nearby, losing the ability to protect myself was frightening," Yuan frowned. "Are you truly all right, Master?" Alan did not answer immediately. In his thoughts, he recalled stepping away earlier because the surroundings had been too noisy. Staying close to the nobles had been the safer choice. Yet that was not the real issue troubling him. Why did divine descent occur? He recalled the phenomenon clearly. When forces from the outer world attempted to descend, monsters influenced by it became frenzied, their physical abilities drastically enhanced. He had no concrete conclusion yet, but unease tightened his chest. "How can this be happening?" Alan murmured quietly. "This shouldn't have occurred here." Alan explained the situation in a low, measured voice. Based on his analysis, these were fringe, outer gods' existences that should only appear after the awakening of the 5 great sins, the occurrence of descent, and the collapse of the law of the world. Their presence implied only one thing. Those beings were preparing to descend upon this land. The conclusion sent a chill through him. Alan's expression darkened as he spoke coldly. "The children haven't even awakened as the 5 great sins yet. If that's the case, why has this problem appeared at all?" The next day arrived quietly. Alan stood beneath the open sky, his gaze fixed upward. "We need to gather information immediately," he said. His eyes shifted toward Yuan, and a heavy thought crossed his mind. If things continue like this, heads will start rolling soon. Nearby, the two despicable nobles stood frozen, still unable to process what they had witnessed. Alan spoke again, his voice faintly trembling, not from fear, but from the weight of the situation. Later that day, Alan arrived at the ducal house. "We're finally here," he said calmly. "After enduring hardship, even greater trouble awaits." He surveyed the surroundings, analyzing the flow of power within the estate, then added flatly, "The disturbances around the Grand Cathernal are increasing." We finally get a glimpse inside Duke Rochegray's stunning mansion. The interior is nothing short of extravagant, gleaming as if everything were crafted from gold. Even our main character, while taking in the surroundings, can't help but think this place is perfect for a lavish social event, especially since everything really is made of gold. Even the wine glasses sparkle with hints of gold. Evan leans in to examine the wine glasses more closely and can't help but chuckle, realizing that Duke Rochegray is clearly trying to flaunt his wealth. He even jokes that they should swipe a few, since someone this rich probably wouldn't even notice if a couple of wine glasses went missing. As he stands there, he notices nobles all around him chatting and networking. He considers that maybe he should try mingling with the other nobles too. Honestly, he'd prefer to keep his distance, but he figures he might as well put on a show for appearances. Out of nowhere, one of the nobles sneaks up on him from behind. When he turns around, he's instantly annoyed. It's Idiot 1 and Idiot 2, the same ones who were bothering him earlier. Now they're acting all humble and nervous, immediately trying to bribe him. Idiot 1 offers him the finest meat from his territory, while Idiot 2 presents a chest full of gold coins, asking if our protagonist would consider accepting some support from his land. Naturally, our protagonist is completely baffled. He frowns, wondering why these fools have suddenly switched their tune, but to them his frown looks downright terrifying, as if he's ready to tear them apart. They shrink back in fear. Classic resting villain face. The two fools finally admit they should never have messed with our main character in the first place, and we get a flashback that shows what went down after the battle with the goblins. Back then, when these two saw our MC's incredible magical power, they were completely taken aback. They had no idea he was a mage, so watching him effortlessly wipe out such a huge horde of goblins left them in shock. So like any normal person would do in their shoes, they pulled one of the mages from the escort knights aside to ask her about magic. This particular mage was a third circle mage hired by Baron Amon, who wanted to flaunt his wealth. The idiots asked her if she knew anything about the massive spell that looked like a black hole, which our MC used to take out the goblins. They were curious if it was just a second circle spell and nothing special in the magical realm. But the mage quickly burst their bubble when she explained that the magic our boy used was definitely not second circle magic. She added that a spell of that level easily surpassed her own skills, which is saying something since she's a third circle mage. Realizing this, the idiots finally understood just how deep in trouble they were. They figured that the magic our MC wielded had to be above third circle, maybe even fifth circle. That's when it really hit them. They had mocked our protagonist, calling him lucky for becoming a count after his brother's death. But now they saw that our MC was just hiding his true strength. That's why he didn't even bother bringing along escort knights. I mean, they're definitely misreading the situation, but they're not entirely off base. So these two guys who had already felt the sting of the Palacio family's cruelty, thanks to our MC's brothers treating them like their personal gophers back in the day, were absolutely shaking in their boots. To make matters worse, our MC was sporting his signature villain face, which was in full effect. He looked downright terrifying. In a desperate bid to save their skins, they hatched a plan to bribe our MC and win back his favor, which brings us to the present moment. Now even more frightened and realizing their bribes were falling flat, they figured their only shot was to beg for mercy. Both of them immediately bowed their heads, pleading with our MC to forgive their earlier arrogance and the jabs they threw his way. Of course, our protagonist, blissfully unaware, has no clue what these two are up to. He even thinks they're just poking fun at him. Even Evan, who usually has a good sense for these things, is left wondering if they're still mocking our MC. Anyway, our guy decides that if this keeps up, it's just going to lead to more trouble. Evan jokingly suggests he should just take them out altogether, but our MC counters that would only stir up more chaos. Deep down, our MC is completely misreading the situation. He thinks that even though he's generally a merciful guy who doesn't care much about what others say, these two have really crossed a line by making fun of him. Getting serious, he shoots them a death glare. Internally, he knows he doesn't really have the power to do anything drastic, but he figures he might as well give them a little scare. This guy can be pretty petty sometimes. The two fools, catching sight of our MC's death glare, instantly realize they're in deep trouble. A little while later, our MC acknowledges that now that he sent Evan off to the Information Guild, it's time to do some snooping for noble gossip. Grabbing a bite to eat, he scans the area for his first target and quickly spots two nobles engaged in a hushed conversation. This cheeky guy then uses a bit of magic to enhance his hearing so he can eavesdrop. He catches snippets of their chat about Duchess Altia and Count Zenonia, and they seem pretty shocked that these two heavyweights have teamed up. Hearing this, our guy figures he doesn't need to stress, since they're just discussing stuff that doesn't involve him. He thinks to himself that families like the Altia dukedom and the Zenonia clan have never really seen eye to eye, so their alliance probably won't stick. He shrugs it off and goes back to savoring his egg tart, which he insists is absolutely delicious. But then, out of nowhere, he hears the nobles mention something even more jaw-dropping, something that's supposed to be kept under wraps. They claim that the real kingpin of the underworld isn't Duchess Altia Loria or Count Zenonia, but rather the Count of Palladio. Our guy freezes mid-bite. The nobles double down, calling out his name and insisting he's the true leader of the underworld, completely taken aback. Our MC drops his food and starts to panic, wondering who's spreading such absurd rumors about him. He recalls that he's only met Altia once when she was younger, And as for Zenonia's notorious daughter, just twice. So how on earth did such rumors even start? He tries to reassure himself, telling himself that it's all just gossip and baseless chatter. But while he's lost in his thoughts, someone suddenly calls out to him from behind. Turning around, our boy can't help but wonder why so many people seem to be approaching him today, which makes him feel a bit uneasy. The newcomer introduces himself as Carmine, the third son of Duke Camelon from the Ashidalon Kingdom, a noble from a different land. Our MC, in his usual awkward fashion, gives a slight bow that almost comes off as sarcastic and introduces himself. Inside, he's kicking himself for forgetting that nobles from other kingdoms were also part of this grand social event. In an instant, Carmine flips the script and starts poking fun at our protagonist, claiming he heard that our MC only became a count by sheer luck. He adds with a smirk that he was so envious he just had to see him face to face. Naturally, our guy gets irritated right away, thinking that these days even twisted donuts can talk. A little dig at Carmine's donut-shaped hairstyle. Just then, two nearby nobles jump in to defend our protagonist. They stride right up to Carmine, questioning if he's really mocking a noble from the Asteria Kingdom. Realizing the high status of these nobles, Carmine's face drops as he comprehends the blunder he's made. Panic sets in as he wonders what just happened. He thought Count Palladio was the weakest and most ridiculed noble, so he figured it was safe to take a jab at him. Carmine introduces himself as Carmine Camelon, a self-proclaimed charming and romantic guy hailing from a distant land. His mission in the Asteria Kingdom: to win the heart of Duke Rotegri's youngest daughter and make her his wife. This guy is so full of himself, he genuinely believes that no woman could ever regret saying yes to him. At a fancy gathering, he was meant to unwind with his fiancée and enjoy getting to know her better. But honestly, this guy had no shame. Every time they walked past other women, he would stop to gawk, making comments about their weight and looks right in front of his fiancée. He even had the nerve to insult one woman by saying she had a big nose. Then he'd turn back to his girl and throw out compliments like, "You're beautiful just like your mother." Seriously, did he think that was romantic? Before he knew it, his fiancée dumped him, leaving him utterly shocked and confused about what just happened. He somehow managed to blow his chance with the daughter of Duke Rotgri. He admits he still can't figure out what he did wrong, but the marriage is off the table now. In a fit of frustration while he was venting, he spotted our main character, mistaking him for Count Palacio. He thought he'd found the perfect target to unleash his anger on. Rumor has it that Count Palacio is an immature noble with no connections, making him an easy mark. Fast forward to now, and Carmine realizes just how foolish that decision was. The three high-ranking nobles in front of him tower over him like giants. Meanwhile, our main character, observing the whole scene unfold, thinks this is just plain old bullying. He's not quite grasping the full picture. No matter how clueless Carmine might be about politics, he should at least recognize who these nobles are. Standing before him are some of the most significant figures in the Asteria Kingdom. The host, Duke Rotegri, the leading figure of the royalist faction, Marquis Mardanio, and the key player of the moderate faction, Count Palin. These nobles are the backbone of the Asteria Kingdom, and they have the power to easily put someone like Carmine in his place. Duke Rotegri kicks things off by asking Carmine if he's looking down on them, questioning whether that's why he insulted a noble of the Asteria Kingdom. Feeling the heat, Carmine quickly tries to clarify that he didn't mean it that way at all. But Count Palan jumps in, asking why Carmine would dare to call our main character by his name so casually. By doing so, he's shown a complete lack of respect, and since our main character is a noble, it suggests that Carmine is looking down on all of them. Carmine hastily apologizes, acknowledging that he messed up. However, Marquis Mardanio steps right up to him, pointing out that the real problem is that he disrespected Count Palladio, our main character. Something feels off here. These high-ranking nobles are being way too polite and protective of our main character. Why are they defending him so fiercely? Did someone have a word with them beforehand? Well, we'll find out. As our main character watches the scene unfold, he can't help but wonder just how unlikable Carmine must be for three high-ranking nobles, who hardly know him, to come to his defense like this. He also notes that the whole situation feels strangely familiar, and honestly, he's spot on. It's like a junior officer in the army getting bullied by the higher-ups. For some reason, this brings back some painful memories for our guy. And yes, since Korean men have to serve in the military, Our protagonist is definitely dealing with a bit of PTSD here. Anyway, Carmine takes off, running and crying like a kid, which is honestly pretty amusing. Shifting their focus back to our MC, the three nobles start asking if he's okay. Their faces filled with concern. This completely catches our MC off guard, leaving him to wonder what on earth is happening today and why everyone is suddenly being so nice to him. With his enhanced hearing thanks to some magic, our MC tunes into the conversations buzzing around the hall. It turns out the other nobles witnessed Duke Rodagray, Marquis Mardano, and Count Pallone rushing to defend him, and they've completely misread the situation. They now believe the rumors that our MC is actually the leader of the underworld. They even speculate that if powerhouses like Duchess Altea and the Zenonia Count were to enter politics, Count Palladio, who supposedly outranks both Altea and Zenonia, would have an overwhelming influence. Hearing all this, our protagonist realizes that everyone has totally misunderstood what's going on. He admits it's becoming quite annoying, and he thinks about just setting the record straight and telling them the truth. But before he can say anything, Duke Rodagray and Marquis Mardano start showering him with compliments. They acknowledge that he's a busy man, but they have something they'd like to present to him. Marquis Mardano kicks things off by mentioning that he's heard our boy has been diving into the world of magic lately. He goes on to say that he's recently gotten his hands on a top-notch magical artifact and wants to gift it to our MC. This artifact, he adds, has the ability to store mana. Before our MC can even get a word in, both Duke Rodagray and Count Pallone jump in, eager to share that they too have gifts they'd like to present. Our protagonist, hearing all this, is left utterly speechless. Tempted by the offers, he wisely decides to keep quiet, which turns out to be a clever move. By saying nothing, he ends up with 2 magical artifacts and 5 mana potions, all for free. At dawn in Duke Rodagray's annex, we finally come face to face with the mastermind behind all the chaos and mind games our MC has been caught up in. A stunning woman dressed in black asks Marquis Mardano how everything unfolded, to which he responds that our MC graciously accepted his gift. Typically, light gifts exchanged among nobles are just polite niceties. But when a noble presents another noble with something as precious as a magical artifact, it carries a deeper significance. In this scenario, the gifts from Marquis Mardano, Duke Rodagray, and Count Pallone are essentially a signal that they want to align themselves with our MC's faction. The woman in black finally reveals her identity. She is none other than Duchess Altea. She welcomes Marquis Mardano into our MC's camp and adds that from this point forward, they will serve the esteemed leader, Count Palatea, together. In essence, Altea and Kalia Zenonia are quietly building a noble faction that will operate directly under our MC. Of course, our boy is completely oblivious to all of this, while everyone else assumes he's in the loop. Now let's take a moment to talk about Altea. Honestly, my first reaction upon seeing her was she is stunning.
That's where we'll leave it for now. If you want to catch the next part, make sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss it.